Welcome to reFRAMED, a podcast created to educate, encourage, and inspire parents and professionals. The Gladney Center for Adoption staff know parenting a child that has a history of loss, abuse, neglect, or trauma requires parenting skills and insight to be reframed in order to create a loving and caring environment. reFRAMED host Emily Moorhead and guests strive to make an impact on our world through topics that are important to you, your family, and our communities. And now, here's your host, Emily Moorhead.
Hi, and thanks for joining us for another episode of reFRAMED. I have Gladney's Executive Vice President and General Counsel, Heidi Bruegel Cox, with us today to talk with us about adoption out of foster care and the foster care system. Heidi, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here today,
Glad to have you.
So I've been involved in child welfare for over 30 years, and I've been at Gladney for 29 of those years plus.
Wow.
Yeah, so I love trying to help children to grow in families that want to have children, and I want to make sure that we do the best thing we can for each individual child. So that's really been kind of my background. I've worked in the children's shelter in San Antonio. I've been involved in Big Brothers Big Sisters. I've done legal aid, and now working for Gladney has been kind of the culmination of all of that experience to help more children.
That's amazing. And you have a lot of duties as other assigned. You've flown with babies on airplanes and wraps. I mean, you kind of do it all, Heidi.
I have. I love it. It's been a great experience.
Tell me about what your passion project is at Gladney right now and what you're working on.
So Gladney has a great project going on right now where we are trying to get as many children out of foster care as possible. So at Gladney, our goal is adoption. It's not keeping kids in foster care for months or years. Once the plan is adoption that the state has decided on, or any private agency that's contracted with the state has made the plan, then what we want to do is help those children find homes as quickly as possible. And that meets several different goals for the state. One, children need to be out of foster care, and they need to be in their forever family as soon as possible. But number two, there's a capacity problem. People keep saying we don't have enough foster homes. If we would get the children out of foster care that are legally free and whose goal is adoption, that would free up so many homes for the children who are coming into foster care. So it would not be as big of a capacity problem. So I'm very excited. I want as many children out of foster care as possible, and we know that we have the families available. We just have to get the processes and the system to move more quickly for these children.
So walk me through what that looks like for these children. So typically, they've been removed for one reason or another through the foster care system. What happens once they're removed all the way to being free for adoption?
Yeah, so every state has a little bit different process. In Texas, within 14 days, the court will have a hearing to determine what are the initial steps. Can the child be returned, or does the child have a relative that can go to? There are a lot of things that the court would consider. And then there are every month or 2 or 3 or 6, there are other points where the court will review the case until they determine that the child is in a place to be returned to the birth parent, placed with relatives, placed with other kinship, someone who's not a relative but who is connected to the child in some other way, or if they're going to proceed to termination of parental rights, and a goal might be adoption with a non-relative. Okay. So lots of options, and it can take anywhere from 10 months to 3 years for this to be resolved.
Just kind of weighing out what the options are for that child can take that long.
Yeah, and there are lots of reasons. So it could be the court system moves slowly, could be that the state workers have huge caseloads and are moving more slowly. It could be that they're trying to give birth parents additional time to make plans. It could be that they don't know what the needs of the child are going to be in the long term. Many different reasons, but we want to make sure that that you take the least amount of time with getting the most out of that time to benefit the child. Okay.
So what's the difference between that and what we would say a voluntary adoption plan, where a woman called Gladney or someone called Gladney who was working with her and said, here's what we're looking at, we're trying to weigh the pros and cons of adoption versus maybe that child going into the foster care system. Right. How would you counsel or provide education on that?
Right, so adoption is not the right option for everyone. Sure. We know it's not the best option for every child. It's not the best option for every birth parent. And there are families who have the ability to care for the child within the family, and those are all great first options. What we would say, though, is if a birth parent is not capable of parenting that child and she doesn't have the support or relative immediately available, that she could make a voluntary plan where she can choose the family, she can choose the degree of openness and contact with that child, and that child can even maintain a relationship with her throughout the years and have that extension of the birth family through the child's entire life, which is totally different from what usually happens in estate placement, where the birth parent has no input into the ultimate placement of the child. She can suggest relatives, but if that's not the best plan according to the state, then that won't happen. And if there's a termination and adoption, she may have no contact with the child going forward. And so it's a very disempowering process to go through the child protection system. So our goal at Gladney is to empower parents to make the best decisions for their children and to watch that flow and flourish for the child, as opposed to disempowering removals and the state taking responsibility.
And the time frame that you were talking about of 10 months to up to 3 years in some cases, just to kind of start that plan, how long does it take a child to become adopted if they're in foster care?
Well, so if they're in foster care, it's that long 3-year-long process. If she makes a voluntary plan, it can be immediate. Okay. And so it completely changes the paradigm for that mother and for the child. The other thing that allows the mother to do is to begin healing from the loss. Mm-hmm. In a child protection case, she is reliving this and having this turmoil and trauma of the state involved in her life and not knowing what's going on, and she doesn't know how to maneuver through the system for months and months and months. And when it's finally over, if it gets to termination of parental rights or to parenting, she has lost a lot of time of her own life and has had trauma as a result of that. So we talk about the child protection system traumatizing children, and we don't talk about the trauma that it creates in the birth parent. And that's such a different experience than what she can have through a voluntary adoption, where again she's empowered to make those decisions.
You're right. I've never heard it framed from that lens, because we're talking about the child, but there are birth parents that are going through that process as well and struggling during that time. So I think your concept of empowerment is beautiful there. So walk me through the children's backgrounds that we're seeing in foster care. We talked about trauma a little bit. So with this long process of them kind of waiting, I'm assuming they're being removed, from different foster homes, and it's just a really long process to adoption. Can you tell me more about that?
So some children are removed at birth from the hospital if there's drug exposure, and that puts the child on a certain trajectory. Other children will be removed at an older age, toddler, school age, and those will be situations where we typically see that the state has been in and out of the child's life. Maybe the child has been on a safety plan with a relative, and then the child comes back to the birth parent, or they've worked with the state and felt like she was in a good enough place the child could be moved back with her, and that didn't work out. I review files all the time, and I'll see a 5-year-old that's had 10 or 15 calls to CPS, that someone would have made a phone call to the department, and they'll investigate, or the parent will have disappeared, and so they close the file. So these children have been through a lot of trauma by the time we see them. And we don't see the easiest cases, of course. And sometimes the foster parents will have a great number of children rotating through their home because they're a temporary plan for this child, and so there will be other children that, even if this child has been in the one foster home for 3 or 4 years, there may be other children who are coming and going on a regular and routine basis. So there is nothing that is totally stable in that foster home, and that's one of the reasons we want these children into a stable, permanent home as quickly as possible. Not because foster parents are bad, sure, but because the system creates an unstable environment for children.
So how is Gladney approaching the foster care system with their programming?
Okay, so we have families that we go out and identify, look for, educate, do home studies for with the goal of adoption. Okay. Their goal is not going to foster a number of children hoping someday they adopt. Their ultimate goal is to adopt a child. Some of them will be foster to adopt families with the goal of adoption. Others come in and they wait and they only want to take a placement once the child is adoptable, which means when the child is legally free for adoption. The court, the state, everyone is agreed and the parental rights have been terminated. Or the next step will be termination, and they've already determined that there are no other relatives or people in the child's life that would be available and appropriate to parent that child.
Okay. Mm-hmm. What would you say to a family who is considering that program?
I would say get a lot of education. Talk to other families who've been down the path. There is so much available information. Thankfully, every agency out there has a lot of training available, and they need to take advantage of every bit of information they can. You know, we have an orientation, we have PAT training where people can come and just hear what kind of backgrounds are we seeing, because it changes sometimes from year to year. We may see older kids one year, much younger kids another year. We want to have families that sit and talk to the new families coming in who can be mentors and can tell them when times were hard, how did they keep going? Because our goal is for this child to have stable and permanent families. And there will be really hard times, and these kids will test you, and these kids will trigger things in your own background. And so we want to help families understand what that looks like and feels like. And it's going to take a lot of education before they totally understand it and can absorb it in instead of just hearing it intellectually.
That's so helpful that that's set up to prepare families even before the child comes home.
Absolutely. That's very important. And what we try to say is that we educate families ahead of placement, and then we train them once the child is in the home. Because, you know, you go to college not for training, you go to college for education. It's not until you're kind of on the job that you get the training.
That's true.
So, yeah. And so once the child is in the home, we're there helping to facilitate, to anticipate issues that could be coming up, to help coach families, and we want to be there as often as we need to help make them successful. It's not a post-placement check the box, how is he eating, and you know what's going on. It really is, how can we help come alongside you, and what resources can we help you obtain in your area in order to be successful for this child.
If someone's watching today and they don't feel equipped to parent at this time a child from the foster care system, what would you say to them about how they could still connect in with this issue, because it's big and it's affecting all of our systems? So how can people get in contact or plug in with changing some of these systems that are detrimental?
Yeah, there are so many ways to help. So there are the court-appointed special advocates. If you wanted to advocate for children, you could get connected to that as a volunteer. If you have adoptive families within your faith home, you can become a respite family possibly, bring food, help purchase things for the new families. There are so many needs that there are for these families when they take these children home. Mm-hmm. So just being available is so wonderful. And one thing I tell people is, don't say, what can I do to help? Don't call a family. They're so crazy at that moment that they can't even stop and tell you what they need. Just drop off a gift card for some fast food place or a restaurant that's their favorite restaurant. Take them a home-cooked meal and drop it off. Do something that's active, that's not going to require them to respond back to you with any information. Yeah. So just be there to help, and bring other groups of people around surrounding them. So there are a lot of ways to connect. And if you don't have any of that in your circle that you're not aware of, contact a local child placing agency in your area and say, how can I help? What can I do to be of service? It may be buying school supplies. This year we had a large group of people help buy school supplies for a number of kids. When we had a birth mother who made an adoption plan for one child, but she had several other children at home that she couldn't get supplies for to get started for school. So we had people wanting to help her to be successful parenting those other children.
That was cool to see staff rally around in that email thread on campus. That was pretty cool. So what do you suggest, Heidi, for next steps? What is Gladney going to be doing to continue working with changing this system?
So the first thing we're trying to do is make sure we have it right within our organization. So we've been interviewing families. What could we do better? What do you struggle with? Going through those files has been the number one issue that families said. They don't understand the Child Protective File when they get it. They don't know what's important, what's not important. It could be boxes thick. So we're helping come up with a tool to help families be successful in figuring out how to even read those huge files.
And that's their child's history, correct?
That's
and there's
correct.
just, I mean, a year missing or a medication missing or...
Yeah, and it may be 5 or 6 years worth of information, and some things are repeated and other things are missing. And so it's just trying to learn, how do I go through boxes of information and figure out what do I need to know out of this in order to be a successful parent, and how do I reorganize it in my head in order to make a decision on whether we're the right family for a child. So the next thing we're working on is how to help the state come up with a way to quickly match children. As soon as a caseworker has a child that they're wanting to place, you know, how do they find the best family? It may be a Texas family, it may be a New York family, but we're trying to help create a system where that is more efficient and more effective, instead of, you know, calling all the agencies or sending things out on the web. So
they've been in care long enough, just wanting to shorten that process.
Yeah. So once we figure out how we can be more effective internally, then we hope to be able to take some things to the state that we've seen be effective within our organization. And so I can't go to the state and say, your system's broken, let me help you fix it.
Yeah.
That will never work.
That wouldn't go well.
No, but there are things that we can fix in our processes that we can go to the state and say, hey, we made some changes and this seems to be successful, and if you want, we'll give you the information that we have as well. We want to be partners. And so how can you be a good partner with the state or with other private organizations? And that's what we're trying to do. There's so much work to do out there. No one can do it all. So we don't want to jump in and reinvent the wheel or do things where someone else is doing it well. Where can we be a value added to the entire process of within the child welfare system to benefit each child?
So talking about value added, can you share with our viewers about the new Gladney Home?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question.
It's such a cool program. I want you to highlight it.
It is. So when we decided to quit having a maternity home for pregnant women, we did not see that was a need any longer. We started asking the state, what are the needs and how can we have this campus? What can we do to fill a need? And what we heard was that some of the more difficult children to place are teen and preteen girls. And there are a number of them who are legally free and just need someone to be a true advocate for them. So we started looking at the best way to do that, and what we found is that the file doesn't tell you enough about someone. The file tells you all the problems that someone has. It doesn't really, it's not a resume. You know, it's more like a rap sheet.
Yeah.
So what we determined is if we could bring these young women into our dorm, spend time with them, get to know them, find out what their needs are, what do they want in a family, how can we walk beside them, and how can we be mentors to them, and how can we help them learn how to live in a family? Because so many of these women have been traumatized for a very long time, and some have come from even harder places than they came from in their birth family. Sure. So they need to be retrained on some things. And so we are now working with several young women. They're living with us. We have the opportunity to get to know them. And then when they're ready for a family, we will be able to ask them, what is it you want in an adoptive family? And we can find the right family for the child instead of just a hope and a prayer, which has sort of been how the process has worked. So it's been very exciting for us to start down this path, and something new, but it's really follows in what Edna Gladney started so many years ago.
It goes back to the term empowerment too. Like, I see your needs. I know what kind of family is going to be best for you. And so Gladney getting to see that so clearly is going to be really beautiful for the girls that experience that program.
Yeah. One of the things we're trying to do is say, I see you. So many of these women, these young women, teenagers, have been invisible to the system because the system doesn't help people. People help people. So we have to figure out how we can see each individual and help her.
Heidi, wrap us up sharing one goal that you have for Gladney, or one thing that Gladney's really focusing on in this next year.
So our goal is that every child has permanency through a stable, caring, healing family. So whether that they are in their birth family and can do that, that's great. And if that's not an option, we want to be able to be available to help every other children that is waiting for a home to find that home, whether it's through Gladney or through another organization that we can partner with. We really have the goal of every child having a permanent home and not aging out of foster care and ending up homeless or in a terrible situation. We want them to have a home to come to at every age, whether they're 15 or 35, they need a family.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Heidi, for your work and for your passion. I've gotten to sit alongside you and see it firsthand, and it's been really beautiful. So just grateful to learn from you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. It was great to see you today.
Thanks for tuning in today for another episode of reFRAMED. If you want to continue the conversation in your home, you can check out our show notes with links. You can also go to gladney.org and click I want to adopt, foster to adopt to check out more information about starting your journey. Thanks and have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the reFRAMED podcast. Be sure to visit gladneyuniversity.org to access the show notes and discover upcoming trainings at Gladney University. We'd love your feedback, so please head to iTunes and rate, review, and subscribe. Until next time.